To let you know, this episode deals with themes surrounding depression. Welcome to Filmability. My name is Joel Fisher, and I'm the author of Filmability, A History of the Splinter Cinema, which you can find on Amazon and Kindle paperback. Welcome if this is your first time listening, and welcome back if you listened before. Remember, you can listen wherever you get your podcasts, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, and all that good stuff. This week's episode is The Men, a film from 1950 starring Marlon Brando about a soldier injured in war who has to adjust to life as a wheelchair user. The Men is directed by Fred Zinnemann, a director who, before The Men, was best known for Anti-Violence with Van Heflin and Robert Ryan, and The Search with Montgomery Clift and Ivan Yandel. He went on to direct films such as High Noon with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly, From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster and Montgomery Clift again, and The Day of the Jackal with Ed Fox. The screenplay for The Men is written by Carl Foreman, a writer best known for screenplays for such films as Home of the Brave with Douglas Dick and Steve Brody, and Young Man of Music with Kirk Douglas and Laura Bacall. After The Men, Foreman wrote the screenplays for High Noon, as mentioned earlier, The Bridge on the River Kwai with William Holden and Alec Guinness, and The Guns of Navarone with David Niven and Gregory Peck. As usual, I would suggest you watch The Men before continuing the podcast, because I will be spoiling everything. Although not currently available to stream, you can still find it to buy or rent digitally. So without further ado, let's get on with the film. So the film starts out with a passage and a voiceover. The voiceover says, "In all wars, since the beginning of history, there have been men who fought twice. The first time they battled with club, sword, or machine gun. The second time they had none of these weapons. Yet, this by far was the greatest battle. It was fought with abiding faith and raw courage, and in the end, victory was achieved. This is the story of such a group of men. To them this film is dedicated." The film starts out with a soldier waiting for his troop. His name is Ken, also known as Bud, and he's played by Marlon Brando. They come over the hill, and the title card and credits go over them as they march forward. The soldiers all get to a building and wait to go inside. One of the men gets shot and falls to the ground. His voiceover says that he was shot in the back and couldn't feel anything. And then we cut to him in a hospital bed, and his voiceover continues saying that the doctor said that he will walk any day now, and he's lucky to be alive. But he sounds frustrated. A nurse comes in and gives him some water, noting that he hasn't been treated all that well, and she leaves. In the hospital chapel, a doctor stands in front of an audience and starts to talk about how the soldiers have lost their ability to walk. This doctor is called Dr. Brock, and he's played by Everett Sloane. He talks through their symptoms and how they can be treated, and he says rather bluntly that in almost all cases, the word walk must be all but forgotten. They must be content and accept life in a wheelchair. He asks the audience for questions. A woman stands up saying that her son is only 19, and Dr. Brock reassures her that with the proper treatment, he may live to be 90. Another woman asks if there's a cure, and the doctor reassures her that paraplegia isn't a death sentence, and he says mortality rate is very low in the hospital. But she clarifies by saying that she meant that if there was a cure for not being able to walk, and Dr. Brock says there is no known medical cure. Today there's a greater race at which disabled people can learn to walk again, with a mixture of psychotherapy and neurotechnology. However, the severity of the injury depends on whether a person can walk again. There is around an 80% chance of a person with a spinal injury walking again. But personally speaking, I find the idea of a person having to get used to a wheelchair and learning to adapt to be reassuring. And I think that a lot of people do need to get used to the idea. It's just a wheelchair. Another woman stands up and says that her husband have a little girl and they would like to have another child for her sake. Dr. Brock says it's possible in some cases, but doesn't want to discuss her husband there and suggests they talk later privately. Another woman stands up and asks if a wheelchair user can control their bladder and bowels. And the doctor says that there are ways that a person can retrain themselves to become more regular. Another woman says that her and her husband have been married for 9 years and he's a changed man. Dr. Brock says that he's the same man he's always been, but she protests. But he says that her husband is just depressed, thinking that he's not a man anymore and that he can't please a woman. She asks if they will have anything in common anymore, and the doctor says, no less than you had before. Another woman stands up and asks if he was a woman, would he marry a paraplegic? And he laughs and answers the question that he just doesn't want to get married. But he does know of a woman who is going to marry one of the patients. A woman comes forward after Dr. Brock has ended the meeting as the women are all filing out of the room, and she asks about a patient and she says that they're engaged, and he says that he doesn't want to see her. This woman's name is Ellen, and she's played by Teresa Wright, who is a sort of semi-regular on the podcast. And I was going to talk about Teresa Wright, considering that she's coincidentally been in a few high-profile films, which are either about or happen to have disabled people in them. But I found something more interesting, and that's Wright's theory. Credited to Dr. Beatrice Wright, a psychologist, her book Physical Disability, A Psychological Approach, talks about how disabled people are perceived and how they perceive themselves, as well as how disabled people can learn to adapt to their new lives. Published in 1960, it seems it was a bit ahead of its time, and perhaps worth a read. The doctor asks why she doesn't leave him alone, and she says it's because she knows it's not what he really wants. She asks Dr. Brock to talk to him, and he says he doesn't want to interfere with the patient's personal life, and says that she must be special to want to go to such lengths to be with him. In the next scene, a group of doctors are coming down the hall of a hospital, and a man in a wheelchair sees them and goes back into the ward to tell the others. The doctors all go around and they see a patient, and Dr. Brock asks about his family. Then the doctor goes and talks to another man laying on his front, and he's reading. Dr. Brock makes fun of him because he's reading comic books, and the soldier snaps back asking if he tells him what to read, and the doctor moves on. Another patient is in a wheelchair, and the doctor asks him how he's doing. He says his family thinks he'll be able to walk again, and Dr. Brock asks if he's explained it to them, and he said that he did, but they just stare at him like he's a freak on wheels. He even heard his wife crying about it. Dr. Brock reminds him that it took him 3 years to get used to his wheelchair, asking if he can't give them 3 weeks. Dr. Brock then goes on and asks another patient about his bladder, and the patient says it's mostly okay, and Dr. Brock says he should do more exercise to get him to help out. He asks him what he wants to do when he gets out of the hospital, and the man says he wants to sell shoelaces. Another man calls out, and they both see the man that Dr. Brock was talking to, and noting how he was a big war hero. And Dr. Brock passes to another man with his sheets over his head, and jokes that he's been missing. The man then pulls his covers back over his head and gives him an angry look. Then they come to an empty bed, and Dr. Brock asks about the patient, and the nurse says that the man went out, and Dr. Brock says he wants to see him in his office later. He then goes to see another man who's using a wheelchair and asks him if he's been practicing on his crutches. The patient says it's difficult, so Dr. Brock demonstrates. And then Dr. Brock goes to see another patient who's lying on his front, and he thinks that his wound has got worse. The nurse says that the patient went to the movies and she only learned about it when he got back. And Dr. Brock gets angry, saying that he won't heal if he doesn't do as he's told, and he'll have his wheelchair taken away from him until he can heal properly. Dr. Brock then goes to another patient and asks him to bend his fingers, and the patient does so, and the doctor congratulates him because he's making progress. Dr. Brock then goes to another patient who's smoking a cigar, as was the style at the time, and he says that he's enjoying himself. This man's name is Leo, and he's played by Richard Erdman. But the other doctor says he won't go down to the gym unless he's dragged there, and so Dr. Brock suggests that that's what they should do. He then goes to another patient and tells him not to work too hard in the gym. And this man's name is Anel, and he's played by Arthur Gerardo. He then goes to see Leo, and he says that he doesn't want to do anything to rehabilitate, and this angers Dr. Brock, because Leo's so laid back and doesn't seem to care, and so Dr. Brock leaves, only for Leo to sarcastically comment about how wonderful he is. In the next scene, Dr. Brock has come to see Ken, and he examines his eyes, and he says he's healing well, and Ken asks how long it'll be until he can leave. Dr. Brock says it's up to him, and Ken says that he'll still end up in a wheelchair at the end of it, no matter how hard he works. Dr. Brock then asks if it isn't about time that Ken accepts his situation, and Ken says that he doesn't want to spoil the doctor's perfect record, saying that he's been personable with other patients like he has been with him, and how he thinks that it will make the difference when Ken doesn't think it will help at all. Dr. Brock then asks if he wants to die, and Ken replies that it would save the taxpayers a lot of money. The doctor then says about Ellen, and Ken says that he wants him to keep her away from him, and asks if he's finished doing his round. Dr. Brock then leaves Ken as he shouts at him that he doesn't want to see Ellen, but as Ellen suggested, I think he's protesting too much. Like any massive change in lifestyle, it can be all about how you deal with that problem. Some people take it as a challenge and learn to adapt to their new surroundings if they see no other option. Some people do see the change as something that is wrong, and that's a lot to do with the stigma of being disabled and how people view disability. There's also the expectations that the world can have on a man to have a certain position in life. They should be the breadwinners and the carers, although this may have changed more these days. In the early 1950s, this would have been the biggest thought on Ken's mind. Dr. Brock then goes outside and says it's time they started being tough on Ken. He says that they should take him off his medication, but another doctor says that he's still in a lot of pain. But Dr. Brock says that it's about time they tried. He says Ken should be moved to the ward with the other patients. In the ward, the other patients notice Ken being wheeled in his bed. One patient in a wheelchair comes to welcome him, but Ken ignores him, saying that he doesn't want to join in and wants to be left alone. The patients joke about him wanting to be left alone though, with none of them intending to do so. They joke that he doesn't want to be a paraplegic, and they wonder why, because they read in the paper that everybody in the end walks. Anna says that Ken's in pain, and they talk about how they've never had any pain, and Leo says that Ken must have had pain because he's a lieutenant, and therefore more intelligent, and so must have felt more pain than they did. Ken then asks to turn the radio down that's been playing throughout the scene, and Leo pretends that he can't hear him. Leo asks Ken if that's an order, and that he should come over here and turn it off himself if he doesn't want to be a paraplegic. Ken then throws something at the radio, and it turns off. And then the wheelchair-using patient goes over to him and tells him that he was a captain and tells him to cool off. And he throws a jug of water over Ken as the other patients laugh. The wheelchair user is called Norm, and he's played by Jack Webb. In the next scene, Ellen goes to see Dr. Brock, and he asks when they met and what Ken was like. He asked if Ken was self-centered and wanted to spend a lot of time by himself. Ellen says that he wasn't, and Dr. Brock says that Ken doesn't want to see her. although he says he's going to arrange for them to meet anyway, and he says he's doing it for him and not for her. She says he thinks Dr. Brock doesn't like her much, and he says he doesn't know her to not like her, but he says that she could turn out to be very bad for Ken. She asks why, and he says that she could just be there because she feels sorry for him, and that he's a high achiever, and that he hasn't adjusted to his life, and he doesn't think that she has either. She asks him how he knows that she hasn't done that already, and he says that he has a feeling that she thinks that deep down things will get better, and that Ken will walk again. She asks him if it's bad to hope, and he says that she should always believe in the impossible, but learn to accept it if it is impossible. And Ellen asks if that means that she can see Ken, and Dr. Brock says yes, and he leaves. In the ward, Ellen comes to see Ken. It's dark, nobody else is there, and she comes to his bed and he's quiet at first, but then he asks her how she got in there, and he says he didn't want her to come and see him. He gets angry, shouting at her and telling her to get out, but she refuses. Then he pulls back his sheets to show how his legs don't work anymore to try and shock her. But she says she still wants to marry him, but he starts crying, saying that it's all over. The other patients then come back in, and one is with his wife. They're all making noise and sound happy, and then they leave. Ken says there's no hope of him walking, but Ellen says that he doesn't even know what he can do unless he tries, and then it might happen. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Nobody overcomes their disability. Ellen may think that Ken could do anything he wants if he puts his mind to it, and that may be true to an extent, but some things are absolute and they cannot be changed. I believe that the world should be more open to adapting to disability. Some say it's special treatment, but it's only allowing the same kind of treatment that non-disabled people get, and that can't be so bad. Access and fair treatment is an equal right, and as we so often don't get that kind of consideration, it can make us feel like second-class citizens. She says that he could do a lot of things if he tried, and that she does need him. She asks Ken if she wants them to be happy. He says he does, but he also doesn't know what will happen. The other patients are in their beds in the next scene, and they talk about how Ellen is a nurse, and that they have a good chance because she knows what she was getting into. Norman says that they make non-disabled people uncomfortable because they remind them of their own bodies, that they can be broken just like that. They then go to sleep as Ken lays there. He's been listening the whole time. The next day, Leo and Elle and Norm wake up and they're talking about their dreams. They note that Ken has been readjusting for too long now. But then Ken raises his arm up to his handrail and tries to pull himself up as the music swells. But he falls back down again, and Norm goes over to ask if he's okay, and Ken tries again. A montage plays of Ken exercising and using weights to get his mobility back in his arms. He sits up in bed and the nurse helps him as he starts to do push-ups. He even uses a chest expander, and Angel does it, and he uses it easily because he's a very well-built man. At the pool, Ken is being loaded in. At the gym, he's weight training and using a medicine ball. Leo is also exercising, but he is doing so while reading his paper and smoking. Ken then asks Angel why he's working so hard, and he says that he wants to go home and see his family, and they both climb the ropes in the gym. And this is an interesting scene because although Marlon Brando isn't paraplegic, Arthur Dorado, who plays Angel, is an actual paraplegic, and so he's climbing the rope to the top just using his arms, and it's quite impressive. I couldn't do it. Norm is trimming his facial hair in the next scene, and one of the patients says it must be because he's got a girl. Ken disagrees, and Norm says that he does indeed have a lady visiting him. He tells them to behave when they get there. Outside, Ken goes down a ramp to see Ellen. He asks her to sit down on a bench, and she protests to be about being told what to do at first, and he insists. He tells her that he thinks that he's getting feeling back in his legs, and she says that she thinks that's wonderful. Back in the ward, Angel is talking to his mother in Spanish, and they're making jokes about Leo. And then Leo's father comes in, and Leo asks about his mum, but it seems a bit uneasy between them, like Leo's dad isn't comfortable with him and his wheelchair. And Leo says that he doesn't have to hang around, and his dad takes the opportunity to say that he's got some things to do, and he leaves. In the next scene, another woman's with her husband, and they're talking about how her husband fell out of his chair. They're being very casual about it, and she says that she needs to get back to work, saying goodbye to Ellen, saying it was good getting to know her, and that they have a lot in common. At night, Leo notices Angel isn't feeling very well. He gets out of bed and gets into his wheelchair, and Dr. Brock arrives with his team and says that he should be taken to a private room. In the room, Dr. Brock says that he thinks Angel should have a blood transfusion, and as that happens, Dr. Brock waits by his side. A nurse then comes into the ward the next day, and the other patients are waiting to hear news about Angel. She says that he contracted meningitis, and they did everything that they could, and then she leaves. So it seems Angel has succumbed to meningitis and died. And sadly, although I'm sure they weren't fully aware of it at the time, but meningitis was far more common and easily preventable than they were led to believe. Modern advancements in understanding patient care, sterilisation, and care for those wounded in war have become far more careful over the years. Having patients laying in beds with open wounds that weren't properly dressed, with patients and doctors smoking, only added to the increasing risk of such an infection. Today, though, although it can happen, it's far less of a concern, and paraplegic patients can live long and happy lives. Next day, Dr. Rock comes in and he goes to see Ken. He starts to test the sensation in Ken's torso and legs. Ken tells him what he can feel, what he can't feel, and Dr. Brock then jabs a pin into his leg, and Ken feels nothing at all. Dr. Brock says he's doing well, but the feeling isn't coming back, and that Ken should just accept it. He continues his rounds, and another patient talks back to him, and Dr. Rock loses his temper again, shouting at the other patients because he's still grieving over losing Angel. At a restaurant, Ken and Ellen are shown to a table, but Ken's uncomfortable because he can notice people staring at him. And yes, unfortunately this is still a thing that happens today. People see a wheelchair user in public, perhaps doing something that a non-disabled person wouldn't expect, and they stare. It could be the novelty of seeing a wheelchair user in public and scrutinising how they use their chair. It could be about that non-disabled person not having any contact with disabled people, so it piques their curiosity. There may even be some kind of underlying distrust, the idea that a disabled person must be looking for a handout and therefore a criminal and untrustworthy, and this is the kind of things that cross a non-disabled person's mind, even if they don't realise it. However, there is something you can do to tackle that. You can either go and talk to the disabled person, ask them about themselves and not purely about the chair, or you can mind your own business. Personally speaking, I don't even notice people staring because I'm either doing something or going somewhere I need to be. But if you want to talk to me, it's always nice to meet new people. On the way home in the car, they talk about Angel, and Ken says that he tried so hard and wanted to carry on with his life, and he still died. And it says that Ken talks about everybody, but he doesn't talk about them as a couple. And Ken says he looked up to Angel, and he tells her that the doctor told him that the feeling isn't coming back in his leg after all. Ellen looks disappointed, but she says it doesn't matter, and she reminds him that they've been together for 6 years, and that he should make an honest woman of her. She says if he won't marry her, then they have a lot of things to do. She reiterates that she loves him though, but Ken doesn't look so sure. Back at the ward, Tom says somebody's getting married, and they ask him about the woman he was seeing. He says she's not coming because she's in Canada, and that she took $900 from him, which is a lot of time, asking if any of them think that that's funny. And then one of them tells him to go to sleep, and he starts to quote Shakespeare. And by asleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh his hair to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. And then he says that it's by Shakespeare, and he's a very nice man. And then he tries to take off his shoes and falls out of his chair. And you think that would have been a funny scene, but it's Norm's frustration, and he's losing his temper and also losing control of himself. At home, Ellen's with her parents, and her dad says that he thinks that she's making a mistake. She says that they still think of her as a child, though. Her dad is played by Howard St. John. He says that Ken's not the same man now that he's a wheelchair user, but she says that he is. And he says that she can't be his nurse for the rest of his life. And this does bring up a valid point, and having Ellen's profession as a nurse being brought up earlier, there may be some kind of assumption that she would have to have been Ken's carer. However, Ken is just a wheelchair user, and his disability is only made worse by an inaccessible world. He says that if Ken loves her as much as he loves her, then he'll let her go. She retorts by saying she didn't realise how he could be so cold and logical, and that wasn't the way it was when he supported the war to let the young man go out and die or come back and be paralysed. Ellen's mother objects to the way she talks to her dad, but she insists that she's going to marry Ken. At the doctor's office, Ellen talks to Dr. Brock about the chances of her and Ken having children, and he says it varies from patient to patient. In the gym, Ken and Leo are using the handbars to move along. Ken asks if he's looking to walk out of there. A montage then follows of Ken working out, and he goes back to see Ellen in their car. He puts a chair in the back of the car and they drive off. The montage continues of him bowling, playing basketball and swimming, training harder at the gym as he stands at the end. And in the gym, Leo goes through Ken's vows, asking him if he really does want to go through with this. At their wedding, Ellen comes up the aisle and Ken gets out of his chair and he stands. But to Ellen's shock, Ken struggles a bit to keep upright and is helped up. Back home, Ellen starts talking about the decor and they're making small talk. Ken then gets closer and his wheelchair squeaks, and you can see that it bothers Ellen. Ken then finds a photo album of his time as a football player, and Ellen apologises, thinking that it was insensitive for it to be there. He said it's alright, but she says that she'll get rid of it tomorrow, and he reiterates that it's okay by shouting at her. She suggests they open a bottle of champagne, and she goes to get it. Ken notices a squeak in his wheelchair as well, and Ellen sits down, struggling with the champagne bottle. Ken grabs it off her though, and pulls the cork out and spills it onto the floor. He gets angry at her that Ellen apologises. He asks what she's sorry for, and she doesn't know. He then thinks that she made a mistake, and she says that she's sorry that they got married. Ken then asks why it took her so long to decide what she wanted, and waited until they got married. Ken then goes back to the hospital ward and watches TV with the others, shouting at them as they look at him, wondering why he's there. He then gets one of the crutches and begins to repeatedly smash a window with it. And I mean, this is a bit of an overreaction, really. I suppose they were trying to show how a wheelchair user would get angry, but this is a step too far. At a bar, Ken is with Leo, and Leo says that he prefers horses to people. A man approaches them and says that they must be veterans from the war. Leo jokes that they're not, and the man patronises them, saying that they've got a good sense of humour and that he knew someone who was injured in the war. He says he admires them, and after what they've been through, that the best is not good enough for them. Ken then asks the man if he can marry his daughter. The man says that he doesn't have a daughter, and Leo says, "Oh, we don't need her anyway." The man then says that he can take a hint, putting down a coin so they can buy themselves a drink, and he turns away. But Ken calls him back, and he punches him, and then they get thrown out of the bar. And as they drive back, they're talking, and the car then runs off the road. And in the manager's office at the hospital, the manager is talking to Dr. Brock about how messed up Ken is, and he says that he wants to discharge him. Dr. Brock says he can't because he's going up against a disciplinary board, and the manager says that he can't protect him forever. Patients are then all playing cards, and Ellen comes to see Ken to apologise. He brushes her off though, but she says that she's sure that she wants to be with him now. He tells her to go away though, and they leave. In the ward, the patients are talking about what to do with Ken, and they're arguing because the police will probably arrest him anyway. One man says that kicking him out won't do anything to help him, and they end up voting 2 for 2, and Norm casts the final vote to get rid of him. Ken then hears about the vote, and he complains, going to see Dr. Brock. Norm then comes to see Ken to tell him that he voted to discharge him, and wanted to tell him why, but Ken doesn't allow him to and goes to Dr. Brock's office. He complains that he has nowhere to go, and he says it isn't easy out there. Dr. Brock then says he can only keep somebody alive, nothing else, even if they feel like a failure. Ken then asks why Dr. Brock went so fast to keep him going in the first place. And then the doctor tells him a story about his fiancée who died 18 years ago in a car crash. And that even with the medicine they had at the time, the option to have her use a wheelchair for the rest of her life wasn't good enough. He then tells Ken that nobody else can make a life for him but him. They both leave the office, and Ken sits in the corridor, and he decides to go outside. He drives to go and see Ellen. He's got a determined look on his face. He knows what to do. He's made up his mind. He gets his chair out of the car, and Ellen's mother sees that Ken's outside, and then they see him struggling up a steep ramp on the path up to the house. He then gets to the step at the front of the house, and Ellen goes outside. She says that he's come a long way, and he says he even had a flat tyre and he changed it himself. He asks her if she's doing anything tonight, and she says that she isn't. He asks her if she'd like to go to a movie, and she asks him if she can help him up the steps. And as she does so, they go inside. I guess that's the movie, and up next I'm going to give you an overall view of what I think about the movie and what I think it means for a non-disabled audience. The Men is the kind of drama that's meant to inform and educate the audience, and it does so realistically and unflinchingly. Right from the start, the film answers some difficult questions that are probably at the forefront of the non-disabled audience's minds, showing that it isn't going to hold back or play disabled characters for pity or inspiration. After all, these are the same men who gave their lives for their country and should be able to get on with their lives long after they come home. However, it's the character of Marlon Brando being put up front that's a problem. You may argue that about the methods that he went through so that he could play a disabled person, but having an ambitious and self-loathing wheelchair user as the lead tells the audience that this is how all wheelchair users are, especially if they become disabled at some point in their lives. The only way that Ken can come out of his depression is to have Dr. Brock to show him a better way. And through a mixture of his personal demeanour and tough love, Ken comes through the other side. It's not through Ken's determination and hard work that he pulls himself out of his depression like Angel, but by an able saviour showing him the right way. Saying all that though, Marlon Brando shows his ability as an actor and how he became so revered by audiences and his fellow actors. Even if his methods did perhaps start a trend amongst actors to try and replicate his success by playing a disabled person. Okay, so up next, I'm going to be talking about the trivia. Okay, the first thing I can tell you is that Marlon Brando is reported to have prepared for his role by lying in bed for a month in a veterans hospital to learn how to manoeuvre a wheelchair effectively. He also remained in a wheelchair on and off the set for the duration of the shoot. He reluctantly made the exception for this method to attend a Hollywood party where he wanted to meet Charlie Chaplin. His date, Shelley Winters, who invited him to the party, insisted he come dressed nicely and without his wheelchair, or not come at all. According to Marlon Brando, this film role classified him as an 1A to the army, and he reported for induction during the Korean War. He was, however, denied on grounds of having problems with authority and his bizarre answers to a questionnaire by the psychiatrist, thus making him unsuitable for service. Jay Cantor, a mailroom clerk at Lou Wasserman's talent agency Music Corps of America in 1949, was sent to pick up Broadway actor Marlon Brando and drive him to the agency. Impressed by the young man, Brando promptly appointed Cantor his agent. Cantor got Brando his first film role, that of the paraplegic army officer in the film, for $50,000, which was approximately $700,000 at the time of recording the podcast. This film features the first public games of the Paralysed Veterans Association's water polo and wheelchair basketball team members, and it features 49 of the men from Birmingham Veterans Administration Hospital. While shooting the men, Marlon Brando stayed in the one-bedroom apartment of actor Richard Urban, who played Leo. Brando slept on the couch and was a voracious eater, and according to biographer Peter Banso, Brando, who was being paid $40,000 for the role, never offered to help with expenses or restock the refrigerator for Urban, who was being paid only $5,000. Keen observers of the film may also spot a future Star Trek actor by the name of DeForest Kelley. He is in the cast in a small role as Dr. Sherman. I didn't notice him, but I'm sure on rewatch I could probably find him. Lux Radio Theatre broadcast a 60-minute radio adaptation of the movie on December 17, 1951, with Teresa Wright reprising her film role. The working title of the film was The Courage of 10, and modern sources list Battle Stripe as another working title. Marlon Brando had previously starred as Stanley in A Streetcar Named Desire to reviews on Broadway. After The Men, the film version of A Streetcar Named Desire was his next role. Some of you may recognise Teal Wright, the man who is punched by Marlon Brando. That's because he was punched by Dana Andrews in The Best Years of Our Lives, which I covered in the previous episode. And of course, The Best Years of Our Lives also starred Teresa Wright, as did Pride of the Yankees. Ellen calls Ken Bud, and Bud was actually Marlon Brando's nickname in real life. When director Fred Zinnemann left MGM Studios after his contract expired with active violence, he embarked on a new career as an independent filmmaker. After trying to find a suitable movie project for almost a year, his search ended when two young filmmakers, Stanley Kramer and Carl Foreman, pitched a story about paralysed war veterans entitled The Men. It was obvious that no major studio would tackle such an uncommercial subject, but Zinnemann saw greater possibilities in Foreman's screenplay and agreed to direct. In August 1949, Hollywood Reporter reported that Kirk Douglas had been considered for the lead role. Three paralysed veterans, Herbert Wolf, Pat Grissom, and Ted Anderson, who were living at Birmingham Hospital in Van Nuys, California, where the film was shot, were to serve as technical advisors on the production. Only Wolf and Grissom received on-screen credit. Many others from Birmingham Hospital were also added to the cast, including Dr. Norman Carr, physical therapist Helen Winston, and nurses Rhoda Cormery and Eunice Newbury. The director recalls his impression of the actor in Fred Zinnemann, an autobiography. Brando arrived. He seemed fine, if a bit surly, and very much on the defensive. It was obvious that he didn't trust any of us, as he was determined to keep his own counsel. He was still very much that Stanley Kowalski of A Streetcar Named Desire, stuck in that character, and he brought some of that into his performance in The Men. It was fascinating to see how deeply the method actors would merge into the characters that they're playing, and how long it took before that they could return to being themselves again. It took a bit of time to get used to Brando. Things were difficult for him, and he was under enormous strain, having to adjust to the new medium. And why not? People of such enormous talent should be allowed some extra elbow room. This was the way Brando prepared himself. He spent 3 weeks, day and night, living with the men on one of the paraplegic wards. He found out not only how they moved and behaved, but how they felt and what they thought. They gradually accepted him as one of their own, and he became one of them. He shared their physiotherapy, played water polo with them, and went to their drinking sessions at the pump room. Soon only a doctor or nurse could tell that he was not a paraplegic. Well, that's debatable, but that's his opinion. Marlon Brando's screen debut received much praise, and the Hollywood Reporter acclaimed him as an important new star in the Hollywood horizon. And how right they were. The New York Times article also reports that screenwriter Carl Foreman and director Fred Zinnemann spent more than a month studying patients in the paraplegic ward of the hospital. In January 1950, New York Times published an article by Zinnemann in which he states that all of the situations and dialogue in the script were written by Carl Foreman from material he picked up from the men themselves. Screenwriter Carl Foreman used Bud Wozniak, a first lieutenant who had been hit in the back by a bullet while on combat patrol, as the model for Marlon Brando's character. After The Men, Fred Zinnemann continued to explore similar post-war themes in his subsequent film Teresa, which focused on an enormously disturbed veteran and his Italian war bride, and perhaps another film that I'll cover at a later date. The film was banned in the UK because of a scene in which Dr. Brock speaks to a group of wives, mothers, fiancées and girlfriends of patients. The subject of having children, and by implication sexual relations with a paraplegic husband, is discussed, and Brock tells them that the ability to beget children varies in individual cases, but was unlikely overall. Later in the film, Ellen also asked Dr. Brock about children, or more specifically, her parents' desire for grandchildren. And this is a shock to me. No sex were British. What a terrible idea. Carl Foreman was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Writing, Story and Screenplay, losing to a similar themed war film, The Best Years of Our Lives. The National Board of Review placed the film on its annual list of the 10 best movies of the year. Early in the film, Dr. Brock instructs one of the wheelchair-using veterans on how to use crutches, and Everett Sloane previously played a paralysed man who uses crutches in the Orson Welles film The Lady from Shanghai from 1947. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week I'll be talking about a film called Please Stand By, about an autistic woman who enters a Star Trek writing competition and decides to go to LA to deliver it herself. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so via Bluesky at bluesky.com/film-ability. You can also email me at film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.